really, every little bit really does help our organization and puts us in a position to invite people, speakers such as Adam. He's actually speaking all over the world now. So I knew him back when, but now he's being told to speak all over the world. So it's a real honor to have Adam here. So without any more, thank you, Adam.
Thank you. So I'll need to talk to Sarah about setting the bar a little bit lower next time. Please do, if you can't hear anything like that, I tend to talk with my hands a little bit, so wave, throw something at me, get my attention if we need to change this up. And there are chairs over yonder, and then a few in the front seat as well, if anyone is interested. So thank you everyone for having me here tonight. I'm thrilled by the turnout in the room. It's really exciting. As you heard from Sarah, I'm from the Marine Mammal Center, and I'll tell you a little bit about the Marine Mammal Center in just a moment. But I want to give you just a little bit of backstory of kind of how I got to where I am today. You heard that I studied kind of biology and psychology and was really focused on animal behavior. I was just kind of mesmerized. When I was a young child, I was able to get out into the water and look under the waves and see that whole world. And I wanted to explore that world. I wanted to answer the questions and all of that mystery that was down there. So I studied and I worked in labs all around the country, and I studied things like bird hearing and speech until I realized I actually truly hate birds. It's a different story, of course. I respect them. I don't have to like them. I studied fish learning and memory, and then kind of fell in love with marine mammals because we just don't know very much about them, actually. So around 12 years ago, before I started the Marine Mammal Center, I was at a conference, and I walked up to one of the best blue whale biologists in the entire world, and I asked a very simple question, I thought. I asked him, where do the blue whales that we see right here in California give birth? And he couldn't answer me. The animal's 100 feet long. They're bigger than a basketball court. And they're an endangered species. But 12 years ago, the best blue whale biologists in the entire world didn't know where they spent part of their lives. The next day, just coincidentally, I was teaching a group of second graders. And I walked into this classroom, and I held up a picture of a blue whale, and every single student in that class could identify it. There's something pretty magical about that. But there's this huge gap. We have this love of marine mammals and this awareness of their existence, but we don't know very much about them. So I wanted to answer those questions. Where do those animals go? How do they behave? So when I was out on boats and I was in labs, I was able to start answering those questions, but I started seeing all the animals getting sick. They were getting struck by boats. They were getting impacted by climate change or caught in trash. And I realized I couldn't just stay in a lab or out on a boat, and I needed to switch fields. And that's what got me to the Marine Mammal Center. So, well, we're going to see how this goes. The dancing slide's lefty. This could be dangerous. All right. So that got me to the Marine Mammal Center. There are some volunteers in the room from the Marine Mammal Center, and I want to take just a couple quick moments to explain a little bit about the work that we do, set the stage for what I'm going to talk about today. So the short story is the Marine Mammal Center is a leader in global ocean conservation. We rescue sick and injured marine mammals from up and down the California coast, from the top of Mendocino County to the bottom of San Luis Obispo. We give them a second chance at life, get them back out into the wild, healthy and happy again. But we're also understanding what's making those animals sick, diagnosing new issues, things like cancer in sea lions, or different parasites, and then spreading that awareness around the world, teaching the next generation of veterinarians as well as stewards. And that's what my role is. As the Associate Director of Conservation Education, I take the stories of our seals and sea lions and find ways to connect people to these animals. What are the ways that they're connected to a seal that's swimming off the coast? What are ways that they can help it? What are reasons why helping a seal is actually helping ourselves? So that is what got me really into this field, and it's the generosity of people just like you that help the Marine Mammal Center function. It's 1,400 volunteers strong, donations from the community that allows us to do all this work. And I'll share a little bit about what we're doing on climate change, but also what is happening around the world on climate change. I wanted to start with this quote. I'll give you a moment to read it. This is by a gentleman by the name of Paul Hawken, who wrote a book called Drawdown, which is a mathematical approach to tackling climate change. And what he said is, if you look at the science about what is happening on Earth and aren't pessimistic, you don't understand data. But if you meet the people who are working to restore the Earth and you aren't optimistic, you haven't got a pulse. I start with this quote because over the next 40 minutes or so, I'm going to talk about a lot of things that are positive about what we're doing to tackle climate change. And I don't want to kind of sugarcoat that climate change is real, it's happening, it's impacting all of us today. But I also want to highlight that there are amazing people and amazing things that are happening, that are going on out there, that can give us that hope to sustain us and to build us going forward with the energy we need to tackle this major issue. Another quote that I absolutely love is by an author and biologist named Margaret Lohman. She says it takes the same amount of energy to complain as it does to explain, but the results are incredibly different. This is my approach to how we're going to tackle climate change. I also spent, admittedly, way too long looking up comics and memes for this talk. So I'm going to intentionally pause every time there's one just a little too long on the slide to make sure everyone appreciates the countless hours that I wasted. When I'm thinking about how we tackle these issues, various kind of different things that I see in the news media and just hear from conversations, people always stand out. And there's a campaign that was done a few years ago by a group kind of IUCN, the group that produces the Red List, kind of the critically endangered species around the world. And they took an approach that I think really summarizes what our current dynamic is when it comes to talking about issues like climate change. And they created some different PSAs. I want to share one with you here that just gives you a taste of what they see as maybe particularly the problem, and then how do we kind of change the script a little bit. Take a look.
So, excuse me, madam, do you can I talk to you about climate change, sir? The ice is melting. The ice is going to be Armageddon out there. Try the one with the orange face. Orange feet. Try the one with the orange feet. Try Trying everything to attract attention. Communicate better with love, not loss.
So this approach of just flipping the script, highlight the things that people care about, that people love, rather than the things that are going to make them sad. This idea of gloom and doom is paralyzing. There's a quote, one of the people that started Grist, which is an online magazine, once said, what you want to do is create a world so amazing that people want it right now, and will do everything to make it possible. That's the way we need to approach this. You're probably all familiar with that.
All right.
So one of the things that she really continues to talk about is the fact that we're not waiting for science to save us. The solutions actually exist. And what we can do is we look for the action that's happening, and that gives us the hope that we need. Now, this is a great soundbite, but what's really amazing to me as a researcher is that there's actually science that proves it. The people that are more hopeful about climate change do more to stop climate change. The people that are less hopeful about climate change don't act to stop climate change. Fear is literally paralyzing. So the more we can give this optimism, the more we pinpoint the solutions, the actions that are happening all around us, the more we can build that community of support taking action on climate change. So this is where my role at the Marine Mammal Center comes into play. And I've always been of the mindset that you can't try and tackle this alone. There's no point in trying to tackle this alone. So let's work together. So around 8 years ago, I partnered up with a group called NOKI, not the pasta. It's the National Network for Ocean and Climate Change Interpretation. It's a mouthful. What it is, though, is it's a group of over 200 organizations at this point that have come together, and they took climate scientists from Woods Hole Oceanographic Institute, and social psychologists, and they put them together because we know climate science. What we didn't know is how do we talk about climate science. So what they did is they scientifically tested how you talk about climate change. And then we started sharing those tested methods out to millions and millions of people. So there are 400 people trained as trainers in this around the country. People at Monterey Bay Aquarium, Shedd Aquarium, National Zoo, you name it. State, county, national parks. We're reaching millions of people with this scientifically tested language that's actually been shown to change the national discourse on climate. The language we're using, and I'll share some of it a little bit later, is actually driving people to better understand climate change and be more interested in acting to tackle it. This is something that I chair the National Training Committee of, where we go around the world training new people to be these spokespeople so that we can reach more and more people. I've had the opportunity through another extraordinarily long organizational name, the North American Association for Environmental Education. This is the largest group of basically environmental educators around the world. And I've had the opportunity to work with a group of other fellows from different backgrounds to create kind of a mosaic of approaches. So pair up someone like me that does more kind of informal education, so you've got visitors, you've got tours, you've got school programs, things like that, with things like urban planners and religious leaders and college professors and preschool teachers. And let's talk about what are the things that are working really well, where are the things that we tried and they didn't work so well. And we've created a few different resources available to anyone online that they can use as they think about talking about climate change with their audiences. And then taking it super local to the Bay Area, which is where the Marine Mammal Center's headquarters is based out of in Sausalito, California, and bringing together 30 environmental education organizations to really talk about solutions. What are the things that we want to promote? How do we make the solutions the easier things for people to do? And you'll see that people are begging for solutions. So we need to be giving them. It's not about standing on our soapbox anymore. It's that people are actually demanding to know more solutions. They're only getting gloom and doom right now in a lot of places. So that's where I come from all of this. What I want to do tonight is really talk about the things happening around climate change. Again, more comments. All right. I mentioned this earlier. This is from The Onion, so a satiric newspaper. But I think this really sums up where we're at right now. We're not waiting for science to say to us. All of the things that are happening that I'm going to share with you are absolutely amazing, but we haven't been hearing very much about them, unfortunately. So let's start with actually the economics of it all. Again, I'll pause, let you see the cute comic. But if you take a look at it, if we just start with money, to be honest, it's actually cheaper to use solar and wind than it is to use fossil fuels in many parts of the country and around the world right now. So this doesn't even need to be an environmental issue for a lot of people. This is simply what is better for your economy, what is better for your community. We can do the right thing for the environment and the right thing for people at the same time. Now that's the current situation, that we can go to solar or wind over fossil fuels right now in most places. But not everywhere. You still have things like really cheap natural gas. And natural gas has been really important. All of the fossil fuels have actually been important to build what we have today. However, it's not going to be natural gas that saves us. One of the things that's really amazing is that in the next 15 years, that bridge fuel, what's always been saying is going to help us transition to that cleaner kind of economy. In the next 15 years, it's going to be cheaper to build new solar and wind farms than it is to use an existing natural gas plant. The economics of this are staggering when we think about what is possible. And what I've been loving is around the world, different groups are seeing that. So when we think about some of the different countries and communities that don't have electricity right now, for example, you think sub-Saharan Africa. One of the goals for so many of those developing countries has always been to kind of emulate what we've been able to do in the United States. Problem is, we didn't do it in the most environmentally friendly way. So it's not that we want to get rid of all fossil fuels and keep all of these people that haven't had electricity. How about they just skip all the stuff that we did that wasn't good for the environment, and they're building solar farms and these small little microgrids in sub-Saharan Africa to, for the first time ever, electrify those communities, but they're doing it with 100% clean energy. Again, these are win-wins when we're thinking about how to change how people are living. Something that's staggering to me is that energy companies are joining on this bandwagon. So Duke Energy, you've got Xcel Energy, which does stuff in the Midwest. Just this week, Arizona Public Service jumped on and said these energy companies are going to cut their carbon emissions. Xcel and Arizona are both going 100% clean energy by 2050. These are the energy companies. So you think about now everyone that Xcel and Arizona are supplying are getting 100% clean energy. And then we think about the impact that we've had as individuals as well. There's so much that we can do, and one of the movements that's been incredibly effective, particularly for some of these energy companies, has been the divestment movement. We're speaking with our dollars saying, I don't want you to do that and I'm not going to support you. And $11 trillion later, we're seeing some of those impacts, and it's in a really big positive way. If you need just a single case study, one example to sum up the economy when it comes to climate change and when it comes to this transition to cleaner energy, I present to you the Kentucky Coal Museum. So I think we've summed up the economics of this pretty well then so far. So let's move on. What else is happening? What's happening around the world then when it comes to action? Major cities housing millions of people have already committed to go clean energy. So all of these major governments coming together, whether it's Tokyo, whether it's Mexico City, and others that are saying, we're done with these dirty fossil fuels. China, meeting its carbon intensity goal early, actually, cutting it 46% in the last 15 years. So the countries that sometimes you hear in the news aren't doing a ton. You think about what they actually are doing. China is the leading producer of both solar and wind energy around the world. So this is a huge ally, actually, in this battle. They're not the enemy. We think about some of the countries in Europe, actually in the next 25 years, banning gasoline-powered vehicles. That's great for India, for France, for Britain, for Norway. But you also think about how that changes the market. If all of a sudden, GM or Honda or Toyota can't sell cars in major business areas, they need to switch the cars that they can. And now it's more accessible to everyone else. Volkswagen, actually starting this decade, is not going to sell another gasoline car. Everything from Volkswagen, starting by 2026, will be electric powered. So this is a great way that we're making the default options, the sustainable options for people moving forward. Now, I fully acknowledge the entire time you were looking at that last slide, you're like, but the US isn't on it. Again, I'm not going to sugarcoat the issues that are out there around climate change, but I do want to mention, though, that it gets overlooked a lot that even though at a federal level the US has taken a back seat, the cities, the states have said, you don't speak for me on this. And that's what the We Are Still In campaign is. So essentially, the day that President Trump said that we're going to back out of the Paris Agreement, all of these groups said no. We're going to join it then. And when you look at the numbers, 17 states, 540 cities, counties, tribes, colleges, universities, 2,000 businesses and cultural institutions. Marine Mammal Center is part of the We Are Still In campaign. 80 cities, all of them pledging to meet the goals of the Paris Agreement. When you look at what this represents, 53% of all Americans are still part of the Paris Agreement. 37% of all of the greenhouse gas emissions are accounted for in the We Are Still In, and this is growing. 58% of the GDP. We're actually the third largest organization in the Paris Agreement with the We Are Still In campaign. So we still have a ton of momentum and a ton of action. There's still more to be done, obviously. But it's not that the US has taken actually a fully backseat to that. It's just what you're hearing from the federal level. The stuff in the cities and the states isn't getting as much attention. But that's what I wanted to focus on. So let's take some of the cities and states, whether it's DC, New Mexico, Maine, New York, all 100% clean energy. Major cities like Chicago, St. Louis, Denver, Cleveland, Atlanta, all 100% clean energy. So you think about these major hubs representing millions and millions of people are going to have default clean energy and the systems to help them live a sustainable life easily moving forward. It's not just the cities and states, it's the businesses. So they've said, well, our customers are demanding this. We've moved to the point where it's not just enough to have a good product. You need to have a good process. You've got Google, you've got Apple, you've got Microsoft, you've got Wells Fargo. They're already 100% carbon neutral. Microsoft just 2 weeks ago said, not only are we carbon neutral right now, but in the next 10 years, we're actually going to go carbon neutral for every emission we've ever put into the environment since our company started. And are funding trillions of dollars to helping fight climate change. Not just advancing new technologies, but also things like natural solutions, protecting rainforests, planting trees, other things.
That was Google, you said?
That was Microsoft, actually. You've got a transportation company, Lyft, as in the Ubers and Lyfts of the world. They're actually carbon neutral. Every single mile that's done on Lyft is carbon offset. So a way that we can help actually supply new technologies or protect existing resources through things like transportation companies. It's not the silver bullet, obviously, because it's not a one-for-one offset always in terms of in the moment. But we think about how these offsets can make a huge difference for getting technologies off the ground or having enormous benefits. One of my favorite carbon offset programs is actually getting clean cooking stoves to women in Africa. Because right now they have no other ways to cook things. So they're using this really dirty fossil fuel essentially to cook meals. There's poor ventilation, so there are huge health implications for it. And there's no way out. Well, how about we get these clean cooking stoves, which are available to these people? It reduces those emissions, it protects health, all at the same time. Coming up in the next year, Bank of America, Visa, Coca-Cola, Kaiser Permanente, all going 100% clean energy. Just think about that for a second. Every Kaiser Permanente in this state, 100% carbon neutral. It's astounding when you think of it. The banks are joining in as well. So major banks have basically said we will stop funding any fossil fuel project around the globe. The only ones that these three groups are still contributing to are ones where they have said that there are people in other countries without electricity that are suffering, and the only current option would have a fossil fuel impact. The second there isn't one, all funding gets pulled. That's how big of a deal this is. This is trillions and trillions of dollars. If you couldn't tell from the picture, Magic Kingdom is also 100% green. Altogether, at the most recent Paris conference, or not Paris conference, but the Paris Agreement conference, the COP conference, This is what came out. So these are businesses that are pledging to meet the 1.5 degrees Celsius increase. You've got 87 major companies, 2.3 trillion in market capital that are putting their weight behind this. So again, pushing the market, making technologies available, making things more accessible at the same time. So what about people then? Because we've talked about international efforts of governments, we've talked about cities and states and businesses, but what about the individuals themselves? There's a wonderful group out there called the Yale Program on Climate Change Communication. And they do sampling all around the world at county by county basis to highlight what are the beliefs out there when it comes to climate change. There's not a single county in the United States where the majority of people don't believe in climate change. Not a single one. I gave a talk in Kentucky on climate change just a few weeks ago. When we think about some of the big goals, the big policies that we're trying to push forward, 71% support the government going 100% clean energy, 70% those fuel emission standards that are currently tied up in court. The majority of people want this. Something that gives me enormous hope, in a sense, is when we think about what it takes to create a movement. So when Martin Luther King walked on Washington, the day he did that, there was less than 25% support for civil rights. But you saw the impact that had. We're not dealing with 25%, we're dealing with 70 or 80 on some of these different issues. We just need to talk about it in the right ways and mobilize people and give them that hope so that they don't feel like they're silenced. Right now, only 1 in 5 people hear about climate change more than once a month. That is a spiral of silence.
I hear about it millions.
Yeah, me too. But if you're not hearing about it, then you don't think other people care about it. So you don't talk about it, and then the spiral continues. But now we know you're not alone when you think about this stuff. That's the latest number. 70% of Americans believe in climate change, and 65% of them rarely talk about it. At the same time, when we think about informal science education groups, the Marine Mammal Center, Norio Center, any zoo, aquarium, state, national park, 70% of the people attending those want recommendations on climate change. So again, it's not us on our soapbox, it's that people are just hearing the bad stuff, and they don't know what they can do to get involved. So let's give them some of those things. To give you an idea of the impact, whoa. Whoa. Sure, I'll stay on this one. Why not? To give you an idea of just the impact of those informal science organizations, like the Marine Mammal Center, like different zoos, aquariums, there are more people in the US that attend zoos and aquariums than in every single major sporting event in the US. 120 million people a year go to zoos and aquariums. Add in the state and national parks, and it's more than the entire population of the United States. These are the groups that we're working to train as educators and to train on some of these best practices of science communication. One of my kind of role models, the person I look up to the most, is a climate scientist by the name of Catherine Hayhoe. Has anyone heard of her before? A few people. She's got some amazing TED Talks. I highly recommend it. She's a climate scientist from Texas Tech that is deeply religious and one of the best climate communicators I've ever seen. She talks about climate change from a religious lens and a scientific lens. And boiling everything that she's done down to a very short video, I wanted to give you a sense of what she thinks is one of the best things we can do when it comes to climate change. Take a look. This thing might have also just died. We'll see.
I think one of the biggest questions we all have when it comes to climate change is there hope? People often ask me, well, what can I do? I'm just one person. How can I make a difference? But if there is one thing that I wish everybody would do, It's talk about it. I'm suggesting that we talk about why it matters. What do I care about passionately that is being affected by a changing climate? Does it relate to my kids? Does it relate to something I love doing, like birding or fishing or even hunting? Does it relate to the economy or national security or the community or the place where I live? Let's talk about what it means to us, and then let's also talk about solutions, because there are amazing solutions. When it comes to climate change, we feel as if it is this giant boulder standing dead still, and nobody's trying to push that boulder uphill to fix the problem. The reality is that giant boulder is already starting to roll. It's got hundreds, thousands, even millions of hands. We just need a few more hands to get it rolling faster, but it is moving in the right direction. But when we look at what's happening with people, that's where I find hope.
So in our social psychology research, when we're thinking about how do we talk about climate change, there are a few things that have really risen to the surface. The first one is around values. How do we frame the conversation so that people are more likely to engage in that topic? What are these universally held beliefs that are that foot in the door strategy? And we tested a lot of them. And what it turns out is that these two, in particular, are incredibly powerful across different ages, across different demographics, political motivations, all of them. The idea that we protect people, places, and areas from harm, and that it's the right thing to do. The idea that we should take action now to prevent harm in the future. Let's take logical steps to actually save people from issues down the road if we've got the solutions available. These are the ways that we start our climate conversations. The next thing we have to figure out is then how do you talk about climate change itself? It can be incredibly complicated. We could do a whole 6-month lecture series on all the different facets of climate change, but you don't have the same ability when you're talking with people to make them sit down, turn off the lights, and I'm pretty sure we locked the door on you. So how do we talk about climate change in a really quick way? Well, we started testing that. And the very first thing that we did is we tested the metaphor that's been the bread and butter for decades, the greenhouse gas effect. Spoiler alert, it doesn't work to help people understand climate change. For a few reasons. One is that a lot of people these days actually don't understand how a greenhouse works. It's a different issue for a different talk. But if you're not talking to people in the language they understand, you're not going to get very far. The other thing that was interesting, though, and this is what really fascinates me because it's this animal behavior and psychology part of my brain, is that a lot of people, when we were talking about greenhouse gas effect, is a greenhouse a good or a bad thing? It's a good thing. We need them. And it was actually putting people in a really weird mindset when we were talking about this kind of impending doom, for lack of better words, by describing something using a metaphor that is so incredibly helpful to society. So we went back to the drawing board and said, all right, well, what can we do to summarize these things? We need a little bit of greenhouse effect, if you will. That's been what's allowed us to thrive. But maybe we gotta move away from the greenhouse. What we came up with was 2 sentences that can summarize climate change, can be taught to school children, can be taught to adults, and truly does actually help people understand what climate change is. Burning of fossil fuels like coal, oil, and natural gas is releasing carbon dioxide into the air. It acts like a heat-trapping blanket. It warms the air, the land, and the sea. This blanket metaphor has helped change the national discourse on climate change. Because people know if you have too much blanket, it becomes a problem. And we need to get rid of that extra blanket. And that extra blanket is carbon dioxide from the burning of fossil fuels like coal, oil, and natural gas. It sets up the solution in the explanation and helps people start to fill in those blanks for what they can then do. It's not the end of the story, obviously, that helps put people in the right direction. So then let's look at the heat trapping gas. Oh, I'm sorry. What's really fascinating is that when I tested this talk literally 10 minutes before you all arrived, all those numbers were in the right place. Not joking. Same machine, haven't even changed a thing on it. So, gotta love technology. All right. So let's look at where the carbon emissions are coming from so that we can start to figure out what are the solutions. You've got energy right over here, big bucket. You've got food and agriculture at 24%, transportation at 14%, industry and buildings at 27%. You've already heard a little bit about some of the industry stuff that's changing, so I don't want to speak too much of that for the rest of the talk. But I want to focus on energy, transportation, and food, and what are the things that we can do, and what are the things that are happening out there. So let's take energy. One of the things that I have loved over the last few years is this rise of community choice aggregations, or CCAs. And what this is basically breaking the energy monopoly. So, for example, I live down in the San Francisco Bay Area in an apartment that is not allowed to have a solar panel on it. I rent, I can't make that happen. So I was forced to use whatever energy is coming into that apartment building. Well, that's not particularly great in a lot of situations. So if the only option that consumers have is to put a solar panel on their roof, we immediately knock out a lot of people that can't do that. Community choice aggregations, solar farms, wind farms, geothermals all around the state that are pumping renewable energy into the grid. I don't need a solar panel on my roof. I have 100% clean energy because I checked a box on my PG&E account so that I got 100% clean energy. Cost me, I think, $3 more a month to be 100% local carbon free. That was it. Accessibility immediately was solved. And this is something up and down the California coast and around the country are booming. You've got Sonoma Clean Power actually covering Mendocino County here, and Humboldt, you've got Redwood, something authority. I forget. We can look it up. You've got those options. You don't need to put solar panels on your house if you don't want to. You've got a group that's going to actually change the market demand on the grid and pump more and more renewable energy in. Groups like Project Sunroof. This was developed by actually a random dude at Google in his spare time. And he realized that you could take basically Google Earth, so that's satellite view, and he mapped all of these different solar rays onto it. And then he took street view, and now all of a sudden you have the ability to go onto this website, type in your address for your home, your school, your business, and what it will show you is your roof. And it will say you can fit this many solar panels on your roof and get this amount of solar energy from it. Interested? Here are your local solar energy providers that can give you a free audit. Really simple. It takes this really kind of abstract concept and brings it down to a personal level to help you find the solutions that you need. This is something I've seen students at schools go to their principals and their teachers, and they can bring it from any number of angles. This is an economic angle. You can save the school money. This is an educational effort, because now all of a sudden we can talk about the science of energy in a much better way if we're putting solar panels on our roof. You can get STEM and engineering and math into those lessons. And then it's an environmental one. What a great way to be a role model in your community. And it saves you money too. Transportation. This is the biggest one in California right now. Lots of different things that are taking place. What I've loved, you've got businesses that are stepping in and putting forward community incentive programs, so actually giving staff benefits if they do responsible and low carbon transportation. So if you take public transportation, you can get it written off, basically, up to a certain amount. Or what I absolutely loved is that they wind up doing things for if you walk or bike to work, And they will wind up giving you things like extra sick days or extra vacation days on your bill. This was started because the businesses heard from their employees that this is something they care about, and it's taken off in a really big way. You've seen the electrification of public transportation fleets. Something that happened within the last year is LA was announced and got the bid for, I think, 2026 Olympics. The years are blurring together at this point. But one of the things that was part of their proposal to get the Olympics is that by the time the Olympics showed up, their entire public transportation fleet would be 100% electric driven. So anyone showing up to those Olympics and getting on public transportation is going to have a 100% carbon-free ride. Amazing when we think again about accessibility. And then I threw on here, because it is honestly just one of the cutest things you'll ever see, is the walking stool. A win-win for everyone. More exercise for students, more outside time for students, and community building. Get to know your neighbors, all the while you don't have to worry about all of that air pollution and carbon emissions. Things like no idle zones at schools and businesses. There's no point in having your car running. And simply having students in particular bring up those different things has seen drastic impacts around the country. Food. This is the one that I focus on a lot because I just love food. And a lot of people don't realize that food is actually a huge part of the climate change story. You saw actually the numbers, depending on how you calculate it, sometimes a quarter of all of our heat-trapping gas emissions. And this comes down to a few different things. The first is the food we actually eat. Not all food is created equal. Things like beef and lamb are 10 times more energy intensive than things like vegetables. It takes 10 times more energy to get that piece of beef than it does to get that vegetable. Now, I'm not saying that we need to go all vegetarian or all vegan. That's not my place to be, and I am not a vegan, and I love bacon. So I stand before you not preaching any of these particular things. But I find it really interesting, and I find it really amazing how kind of changes can have a big impact. So we think about skipping one meat dish a week. So reduce one meat dish a week. And it's the equivalent, over the course of a year, driving 1,200 miles less.
Wow.
That is from San Francisco to Denver, by switching one meat dish a week to a vegetarian dish. You cut your beef consumption alone by 80%, so not completely eliminate it. Get it down so it's 20%. Special occasions, your entire carbon footprint for the average American can drop sometimes up to 35%. Your entire carbon footprint. Simple things. But we also think of how do we make this a collective action so it's not on your shoulders. That's where some of the student projects have come out that I really love. Things like Meatless Monday programs in schools. Students in Oakland went to their teachers and said, hey, meat has a huge environmental impact. It impacts water, it impacts climate. Can we just have one day without it? The school said yes. And then the school district said yes. And then the county said yes. And now everyone in all of Oakland has Meatless Monday programs for their schools. Same thing for New York City and Los Angeles. Again, by students. That we can have the same impact at our own companies, our own businesses, our own families. You have many communities that you're a part of that we can help influence this on. That's one side of the story, of what we're eating. And we've seen even alternatives form, whether it's the Impossible Burger or the Beyond Burger, making things more accessible. Something that I found really interesting is a study came out a few weeks ago that said if you just add, I think, 20% of your menu being non-meat at restaurants, it increases the purchases of non-meat dishes by 50%. It's that people just want the options more than anything else. So let's let people know that that's something we care about. That's how businesses operate. So let's just make our voice heard each time and we see the impact it has. That's on the food we eat side. Then there's the food we don't eat. And this is a different issue. It's just shocking when you think about it. 30 to 40% of all food in the US is wasted. 30 to 40%. That's an issue for so many reasons. But one of the other things is that what you do with that food after it's wasted has a really big impact. Let's take that burger that you don't eat, and you throw it in the trash can. It's going to break down, it releases methane, that's a heat-trapping gas. Let's back up the story though. I've got that burger on the table, somehow or another it goes bad. Let's avoid that in the first place next time, but it happened. I throw it into a compost. It breaks down, that methane is not released. It goes into the soil, and that's fertilizer. There are essentially 0 heat-trapping gas emissions when you compost. It just depends what bin you throw it in. And this is something where hopefully we can see more and more compost programs building. We know that things like waste are an issue just in terms of finding places to put things, but we've also seen the growth, whether it's in schools or businesses, to set up things like recycling programs and other options. Let's just keep going with that though. The framework is there. Let's build those composting programs in schools. Let's build those composting programs at home and composting programs at businesses. And that will make a huge difference as well. There's so much that we can do on all of these big ticket items. So whether it's things like transportation, whether it's things like energy, whether it's things like food, the options exist today in our own homes, our own schools, our own businesses to take action. I want to share just one last example for you here. You're all familiar with it. You've got Greta. Now, the picture on the left there, that was her first day sitting in front of Parliament. Anyone know how long ago that was? Just throw out answers.
6 years?
I hear 6 months, 2 years?
2 years.
2 years. Around a year and a half. A year and a half ago, no one knew Greta's name. She sat by herself in front of Parliament, and a year and a half later, 4 million people stood behind her in New York City. That is how quickly things can change. That is the power we have if we tell the right story. Go with hope, love not loss, and highlight the ways people can get involved. Let them see how they can be the heroes of their own story. And that's how we can tackle the issues facing us right now around climate change. I'll share just one last thing and I'll open it up for questions. If you're interested, you can get involved. There are great groups up here in Mendocino County. There are climate action groups for Mendocino. You've got the Noyo Center. You also have the Marine Mammal Center. So if you're interested in getting involved, you can volunteer with us. We're always looking for more volunteers and we can give back to the community, whether that's doing educational things, so talking about the story, whether it's helping us rescue animals that are being impacted by climate change. You can go onto our website. We've got a new orientation for volunteers in Mendocino coming up in around 2 months. Donating will help to further these efforts and then take action. You can go onto our website, see so many different ways to get involved, but all of the things that you heard about today are all possible no matter where you are around the world. And every bit helps. And the one thing I'd ask from you, in addition to doing it, talk about it. Because that's what grows the community. We're not going to solve it with individuals doing things by themselves. We're going to solve it by individuals talking about it and getting more people involved. And that then creates the systematic change that we truly need. So, with that being said, I'll put up 2 cute photos of marine mammals because I have to. I work at the Marine Mammal Center. And what I'll do is I'll open it up to a few questions if people have them in the group.
Hi, I'm Karen. I just want to acknowledge you for talking about the food because people are really afraid about talking about the food. And I applaud the Marine Mammal Center and you for finally talking about it.
Other questions? I don't know what time Sarah's kicking me out of this room, but I'll know until she does it.
I'm not.
There are other questions.
We'll be here all night.
I gotta give a talk tomorrow morning, so I can't go far. Yes,
What do we know about efforts for reforestation?
great question. So if you didn't hear, the question was around reforestation. So there are two different ways we can tackle climate change, and we need to do both. I focused my talk predominantly on some of the things that we can do to cut carbon dioxide from getting into the atmosphere. Then you've got the things that are going to take carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere. And nature's pretty amazing. The basic building block of plants does that. So planting trees is a fantastic solution. Different studies have been done that can show that if we plant the right trees in the right places at the right numbers, we can eliminate carbon emissions by around 20%. That's huge. It's not the full story, so we can't just go with that. But this is a great effort. Something that happened at the Davos Summit last week.
World Economic Forum.
World Economic, perfect. All blurred together at this point. Was that most of the countries participating, including the US, signed on to plant 1 trillion trees around the globe. So that's going to make a huge difference. And thinking about what we can do in terms of planting trees in the right places has many benefits beyond just climate. We think about the accessibility to nature. That's going to be amazing. The fact that we can do things like community gardens to bring people together, have our own food local so it doesn't have carbon emissions coming to it. All of that makes a huge, huge difference. Even just planting trees can help with what we call the urban heat effect, which is that it's really warm in cities, and that's really dangerous. But having trees actually cools the air around you and makes it more hospitable to actually be in that area. So if you can plant trees, if you can join groups doing community gardens, please do so. It makes a huge difference. Yeah.
I don't know that we really need our temperatures cooler, but having moved from Mendocino here recently, there are almost no trees in Fort Bragg. It's actually really rare, and it was totally forested with bishop pines and short pines, but whatever. There are almost no trees. So if you start right here, I don't think that the city has a tree planting program, not that I'm aware of. And it's wildlife habitat, it's all sorts of things, but
I feel like there's an opportunity.
it's crazy.
I feel like
I
it's
know, it's a lumber town. I know, it's a lumber town. That's actually what the editor of the Advocate and Beacon told me this morning. It's a lumber town, and they cut all the trees they could. I'm like, well, okay, yeah, okay, but that doesn't mean it has to be that forward.
Talk about it. Let people know about it. Talk to your community leaders. Make them know that these are things that you care about, and you would be shocked at the impact that you can have with that. Yeah.
You mentioned planting the right trees, the right species, I assume, in the right places. Are you talking about replacing the native trees, or are there other is there somewhere we can go look up the best trees for carbon sequestering?
Yes. There is a place that you can do it. I'll tell you off the top of my head, no. I'm not a plant guy, the same way I'm not a bird person. But yes, I know that those resources exist. Sarah, do you know off the top of your head?
Well, our Native Plant Society and what the Noyo Center is looking to do is to replant the headlands. If you look at some of our historical pictures of that headland, it did have trees. And people have trees in their yards, and so we don't have tree-lined streets for shade, but there's a great, very active native plant, and looking forward to replanting with natives on the headlands. And I can't help but bring up the other forest that has disappeared without us seeing, except for our divers, the kelp forest, and how much I challenged Dad. I was like, can you talk about our kelp forest? He's like, well, maybe you ought to talk about that. But I just think that, what the Noyo Center is looking at is actually clearing these spaces from the urchins and having these kelps grow and their spores will spread kelps, and helping that forest is going to help, that kelp does the same thing. Algae in the ocean does the same thing as trees on the land do in that ocean. So
Yeah.
help the kelp forest is definitely a part of this equation for us.
Yeah, kelp are the rainforests of the oceans, basically. They're taking in great deals of carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. It's thousands and thousands of cars worth of emissions for the kelp
it's-
forest. We'll go here and we'll go in the back. Yeah.
Last year, we had a terrible mortality rate from whales
Mhm.
on the coast, and I know that you were probably part of the team that responded to that, as was Sarah, certainly here. The whale sightings this year seem to be low. I mean, it's anecdotal, but people I talked to who were out there during the bird counts, usually they see a lot of whales. There wasn't a lot of whales out there. Do you have any idea of how the whales are doing currently? Are we expecting a similar mortality problem again this coming spring? Or what is the current situation?
You got that, Adam? I bet you do.
So I'll back up from that question to
Back to
give-
marine mammals.
Yeah, that's fine. I should expect nothing less. I'll back up from the question to give some backstory for those that might not be as familiar. So last year was an incredibly difficult year for gray whales in particular. So gray whales go on the longest single migration of any mammal in the world. They have their babies down in Baja, California, and then they have their favorite restaurant up in Alaska.
Yes.
And what a migration is you go from your home to your restaurant and back. So they traverse this huge area, 11,000 miles or so. And what we saw is last spring, all of these really skinny whales washing up along the California coast. So that's where the Marine Mammal Center will get involved, other partner agencies as well, because we want to learn from death. We need to figure out the clues. It's kind of like CSI marine mammal. So we took blubber samples and we looked and saw what might have been causing this. And then we worked with other researchers to try and figure out the whole timeline. Because we only saw the animal wash up on a beach. We didn't see where they were 2 months earlier or 6 months earlier. And what it turned out is that the whales coming down to Baja, California, so those pregnant moms, the males, showed up to Mexico skinnier than normal. Then we saw less calves born than normal, around 50% less calves born than normal. So that gives us some immediate clues that it wasn't Mexico and the waters around Mexico that were the problem. It was things leading up to Mexico, which points us to Alaska and the food. And we don't have all of the clues. It's really hard to pinpoint variables in just a short one season type of thing. But we know that the Arctic is warming. It's warming faster than every other place around the world. And we know that that kind of warming air and atmospheric temperatures is impacting the ice, which impacts the food chain. And we saw a massive die-off. Now, what's going to happen this year, it's still really early to tell, to be honest. Typically, when we've seen a massive die-off of gray whales, it's what we call an unusual mortality event. The last one we had was in 2000 and 2001, I believe. I can double check that if you're going to put it in a newspaper. And it was a 2-year event. So we are taking action now and preparing that we know that one bad year of food can't necessarily always be saved by a good year the next time. But it is really early right now. More data will be available as we get towards the end of February and as we start seeing what's happening as the whales come back up the coast in March and April. Yeah.
We're believing that the whales are migrating farther offshore, so they're harder to see now. And obviously, there was a lot of them dying. And they're coming much later than they used to be. I have friends who are working in San Ignacio Lagoon, and the whales have showed up much later than they ever have before.
And this is
And
something
fewer calves, you're right.
And this is something that we're seeing with a lot of different species, this mistiming of what had once been a really predictable cycle. And the thing with whales, the thing with seals and sea lions is they're incredibly resilient. They're mammals, just like we are. But the food that they depend on is not quite as resilient. So we're seeing animals shifting locations, which then causes different issues. So in San Francisco Bay, for example, we've seen humpback whales in the bay
Yes.
for the last 3 years. They go under the Golden Gate Bridge and are hanging out around Alcatraz and other major areas. It is a tourist delight. But it gives pause for a second. Why, when we had never seen humpback whales before, are they now showing up? Turns out it's because there's tons of good food in San Francisco Bay. But where was all the food that they were going after that wasn't there? And it's not. And now all of a sudden, even though the whales have lots of places to find food, this is where the gray whales came into San Francisco Bay last year too. But now you got one of the biggest shipping lanes in the entire world. So the gray whales that washed up last year, there were a fair amount of them. We, I think, did 13 or 14 postmortem exams. Half of them were really, really skinny. The other half were really, really skinny and hit by boats. So this is something where it gives us clues. The seals, the sea lions, there are sentinels for ocean. We can learn about these changes by studying these animals. It's why the research part of the Marine Mammal Center is actually so critical. Something I tell directly to my veterinarians at the center all the time is that I honestly want to stop rescuing seals and sea lions. My goal is that instead of getting these animals better, and getting them back out into the wild, we stop seeing them come in sick in the first place.
Yeah.
And it's why we can't just do rescue and rehab, and why we need to be doing research, and we need to be doing education. And that way, hopefully, we can change the playing field in which these animals are living.
I was just going to say, that's a wonderful partnership that we have around the unusual mortality event. We had, on the 31st, we had a gray whale calf in Manchester, so I went out, we have a small team, Noya Center, and we just kind of held the place for the Marine Mammal Center vet to come on site, and then they did a full necropsy, and that calf, I've heard of 3 that were born on the south route, 2 seen alive, and now this one was born too early or on the way down. So that's an area that Noya Center and Marine Mammal Center have a really good partnership in that. And to your point about the whales not being seen, December, not so much of a pulse, but then in January, there were peak days of seeing some more normal numbers of the migration. So there were some good days of, 50 plus, I think, that the Mercers were seeing. Sorry.
So we probably have time for 3 or 4 more questions.
Yeah.
You had your hand up earlier.
Yes, I was just going to mention the little publication from the International Monetary Fund, and they put this forth, the fact that whales are such a huge carbon sink, that through the life of this time of the whale, it ingests so much carbon, like 30 plus tons, and then when they sink to the bottom or whatever, and so that's like a good way to bury carbon, and it really does, trees are what people see and purported to be carbon digesters, but the whales actually are a much more awesome resource for that, and we could just have more whales.
For those that are interested, there's a great video you can find on the internet. Just Google how whales change climate. And there's like a 3 to 4 minute video that'll show you exactly how the carbon cycle works and the role that whales play based off of their place in the food chain and role in the environment. So I highly recommend that.
All the whales that washed up last year, the great whales, oftentimes, do they not, a whale in the ocean when it dies, does it not just sink to the bottom? So how do we know, how many did that? instead of watching it.
So I'll repeat the question just for those that were in the back didn't hear. So it was basically, what about the animals that you're not seeing? So yes, these whales washed up on the beach, but what about any that just sank? And that's a big question mark when it comes to a lot of these things for marine mammals. It's why we depend on people like you as our eyes and ears. So we rescue between 700 to around 2,000 animals a year as the Marine Mammal Center, and every single one of those is because of a phone call from someone like you out on the beach. We've got a 24-hour hotline, 415-289-SEAL. We try and make it easy for you. But yeah, we know that there are a lot that we don't see. There are different extrapolations and research that's been done on a few different things. So I know off the top of my head, whales entangled in trash. They believe that for every one whale entangled in trash that's found, there are 10 others that are not. So similar different types of calculations are done for some of those mortality events. Yes.
First, I just want to say amazing talk. Thank you so much. I feel like it was you mentioned, I really like your message of having conversations and talking more about these issues to get them raised. Is there a place or several places you could point us to as kind of like your go-to resources, or is there a list of a magic list you could point us to that where we could go to educate ourselves and maybe get tapped in more with others who are having that conversation?
Yeah. So there are a lot of different resources online, organizations. I would say utilize the organizations local to you, groups like NOYO, the Marine Mammal Center, as a community that you can come together, because the reason why I do so much work with collaborations is not just for the impact that we have in sharing the story, but I feel like particularly with climate change, with issues like overfishing, with ocean trash, it's not just a mental issue, it's a social and an emotional one. So these 200 plus people part of NOKI, that national network that I'm part of, that's my like support system. Those are the people that when I have a weird conversation being like, how do I even address that next time? I get on the phone and I call the climate scientist from Woods Hole, or I talk to my colleague at the New England Aquarium, or wherever they are. So that's been a huge thing, so that you don't have to feel like you're doing it by yourself. In terms of resources, Marine Mammal Center's website has some different things on it, so marinemammalcenter.org. You can search any of those groups that I put up before. So the National Network for Ocean and Climate Change Interpretation would be the one I would actually most recommend around climate communication. There's actually a free online course that we've made. It's a few different self-paced modules that takes you through some of those strategies. So the values, the different metaphors we've come up with, there are 4 different ones that we have. So that's something that you can find. You can come up afterwards and I can write some things down or give you a card, things like that. So if it's easier for me to send stuff to you, I'm happy to do that. In terms of climate science itself, there are a few different groups that I think are doing a really good job in simplifying things a little bit. So you've got the Yale program on climate change, which is all around beliefs. You've got Climate Central, which does a lot of very visualizations that help you figure things out. And to be perfectly honest, I know it doesn't seem like it would be, but NASA and NOAA, they're untouched websites. I can't say the same for EPA, but NASA and NOAA actually have some amazingly good resources, and NASA even has one specific for kids that I recommend. Yeah, maybe 2 more questions.
That was like Sarah, the question I was about to ask was like, how do we get more kids like me really interested in this? Because it's really important that every age knows about this.
So I think we've started to see that happen globally, that people have realized a few things. A, that youth voices matter. It's sad that I have to say that, but I think it's been showing more in terms of the impact that they can have and the voice that they have. I think, again, the communities, that solidarity that comes with having a lot of people in agreement and feeling the support systems, that you don't feel like you're sticking your neck out. Because we're a social society, we're programmed not to stick our neck out on things. So I think what it comes down to is talk with your friends, talk with your family, talk to your community, and if you realize that you're in agreement, and the beautiful thing is when you look at the data out there, most people are. Then all of a sudden you can go forward and start talking to your schools, start talking to your community groups. Maybe it's a sports team, maybe it's a club you're a part of, whatever it might be. But then you have that strength in numbers, and you talk to your community leaders that way. There are countless stories of Greta's, to be perfectly honest. Greta gets all the attention, and what I admire about her is she doesn't want it, and she actively tries to give it away to the other people, whether it's the scientists or other youth. But I think it just goes to show the impact that you can have if you stay strong in your convictions and you use the right channels. You can't necessarily take on everyone all the time, but your sphere of influence, no matter who you are, what age you are, is incredible in today's day and age. And whether it's social media, whether it's your school, whether it's your family, whether it's your club. A stat that really has stuck with me, it came out maybe 6 months ago or so, but there is a study looking at climate change messengers and the impact that they have. So we all know who is telling the message has a big impact on whether or not you believe it or care about it or want to act on it. So they studied, all right, well, what about when talking about climate change? Who are those experts that are able to bring people in and change behaviors? And just a whole bunch. So politicians failed miserably in every category. Not trusted messengers. The media pretty much failed miserably as trusted messengers, unfortunately. It was partisan, is why it wasn't a particularly effective thing. And then they tried some other ones, and they tried things like school teachers and principals. Fantastic messengers. Informal science centers, the zoos, the aquariums, the state, the county parks. Fantastic messengers. The number one messenger, the one group that had the most impact changing people's behaviors, the 6th and 7th grade daughters.
Daughters of what?
That was the one. Statistically the one that had the biggest impact. Others did too, but it was that group that really rose to the top. And I find that very fascinating.
Okay, I'd like to mention some local things that people could do. So our city council meets every second and fourth Monday of the month. You can go, and at the beginning of the meeting, there is an opportunity to speak for 3 minutes on what are called non-agenda items. So they haven't been put on the agenda, and you can just go up there and say, I'd like to see more trees. Now, for the woman who made the comment about trees, I've only lived here for 17 years, but there's been a lot of trees planted. It was entirely bereft of trees.
Wow.
But a couple of years ago, some activists got the city council to do the trees that we do see, and there are not enough of them, I totally agree. So that's one thing. Go to your city council and talk about climate change. I do it all the time. Join me. It's really, really important. But Redwood Forest Foundation, which has an office half a block from here, is restoring the Usal Forest. It's a brilliant, wonderful effort that's very unique to our area. It's a combined effort of the industry, the people who usually cut trees, who are beginning to see a different light, and environmentalists. And the board is fantastic. Support Ruffy, they're called, but Redwood Forest, RUFFI, Redwood Forest Foundation, Inc. Then Fort Bragg has done some pretty exemplary things for a small town. We are a bee-friendly city, and that has meant planting bee-friendly environments. And if you go to this town city hall, you can get information on what plants are bee-friendly and all that sort of stuff, and they'll hand it out right there. And a new initiative is called Fort Bragg, America's First Garden-Friendly City, which is almost hilarious because there are many garden-friendly cities in the United States. But this is like trying to be conscious and be civically conscious about intention And so there, they are starting a community garden. This is headed up by Matt from the Stanford Inn and by, Jamie from the Botanical Gardens and many other local gardeners. And the rumor I've heard is they're going to do a community garden at the Aquatic Center. Yes, a community garden at the Aquatic Center. So they'll be looking for volunteers. And the final thing I would say is our local chapter of the League of Women Voters has been terrific in the last 2 years. And I joined them because they have made a tangible, meaningful commitment to climate change messaging. So climate change is top priority for them. They've had the meetings of the young farmers that led to the initiative of the garden-friendly community. So support the League of Women Voters, go to their events, there's lots of stuff happening with the League. So there's a lot happening in our community, so there's a lot we can do with it. Great talk.
Thank you for sharing.
Yes.
Yeah, the moral of the story, hopefully that you take from this, is that you are not alone. You see all of the things all around that you can be a part of. You're already doing great things in your community, I'm sure. Now you have that support system, and you've got those new opportunities that might be available as well. Yeah.
Well, I think, as I'm thinking, I'm writing down some of your talking points, which are fascinating. And I thought, I'm just going to email these tomorrow morning to all my friends. I have more than 100 people on my list. You'll get one too. And they're all over the United States. So, heck. And write down a little card, all the talking points, so you can go up to someone and just say, hey, look what I just found out.
Start with values. Figure out what they care about. Talk to them in their language, and it'll make an enormous impact in being able to take that conversation further. So, with that being said, I will stick around and answer additional questions, just kind of one-on-one. Happy to share. But thank you for coming out, spending a Friday night.